President Biden spoke to Congress yesterday, if you want to call that. He was speaking to Congress, and he was giving a joint address to give him an update, give America an update on the last 100 days of his administration. He has been in the White House for about 100 days today, or recently. And he wanted to give us an update about what is going on there. And so we got to get into some of this. Now, I'm not particularly interested in this story. These types of speeches are just very boilerplate, right? It's sort of just like droning on to even have to talk about it. But it is the president. It is the leader of our country. And they have a lot of power right now. You can see even from the thumbnail, what are we looking at? We've got Joe Biden, we've got Nancy Pelosi, we've got Kamala Harris, and they are all back there sort of laying out their vision for the next 3 years. And we want to make sure that we are up to speed about what they want to get into. So we're going to go through it. Nothing really stood out to me on this whole speech. I'll be honest, I didn't watch it. I read the transcript today because Joe Biden talks very, very slowly, and it's just hard for me to follow along for 60 minutes or whatever it was. But it's boilerplate stuff. He's got to come out there and check a bunch of boxes. And so, I think of the outrage that you see on either side, whether, this is any type of statement that seems like it is a level 11 statement, people on the left, oh my God, this is the best, whatever. That's insane, right? It clearly wasn't. And the people on the other side that say this is a communist dictator who's going to wreck America, it wasn't that either. It was sort of something just like a bland, very vanilla update from a political figure who's been in government for like 50 years. So nothing really exciting there. Now let's take a quick look at what the breakdown looked like in terms of talking time. So Brett Baer posted this, and we see here that it says legislation, including relief, jobs, families, and plans. He spoke for 19 minutes about that, right? So that was the brunt, the crux of the speech. Then it sort of worked its way down from there. Economy and jobs, 7 minutes. Foreign policy, 7 minutes. Healthcare, 5 minutes. Guns, 5 minutes, which is a lot of time given the fact that, it's sort of a lesser problem in my opinion. We've got war and national security, 5 minutes. So guns get the same amount of time as healthcare. It's kind of okay. Then we have another healthcare for another 5 minutes. Then we get over to COVID. Then we go down to immigration. So guns get more time than immigration is what that looks like. Then we get police reform and George Floyd, which is what I am most interested in. So we're only going to be spending time on this section right here today. Police reform and Floyd, because he spent 3 minutes on that, and not much was really in there, but we are going to dive in and see what he is getting into. We've got, bipartisanship, less than 1 minute, voting rights, less than 1 minute, families, 2 minutes, China, criticism, 3 minutes, climate, 2 minutes, education, 3 minutes, and on and on and on, right? So very, very bland. How do you say anything about everything in 60 minutes? It's a hard thing to do. So he's just going out here and just checking the box, which is why these things are very, typically pretty bland. And not many people watch this one, to be honest. And we're going to show you those numbers here in a minute. So here is Joe Biden. Here's a picture of sort of, the scene. We've got Maxine Waters, it looks like. Down here, taking a look at the president. Then we've got, looks like Bernie over here. We got Joe Biden. Everybody's masked up, of course. These are all senior citizens. They're all vaccinated. They're all, some of the most powerful people in the world. So they have the best healthcare plans, and they've all, clearly, got the best treatment, immediate access to vaccines and so on. But they're still doing the mask theater as well as the social distancing theater. So the chamber was only half full. I think AOC didn't get an invite. She got, sent home because they're still doing this social distancing, whatever. They're welcome to do that. That's fine. It's just kind of a strange thing to be doing. Kind of a weird message to be sending to the country. We have, like, he's on the verge of this 100 days. This should be sort of a triumphant moment. We're sort of coming out of the wave. Everybody has seen the charts at this moment in time. You've seen sort of the big spike that we just had over, very recently, sort of coming out of that. Many people were expecting a fourth wave would be coming, and it looks like maybe the vaccines are, stopping that. They're nipping that in the bud. And you would imagine that, one of the initial things that your introduction to the American people after your first 100 days would be something like, hey, we did it. This is great. And everybody come back in. All Congress people are vaccinated. And you bring them in and, sort of a return to normal thing, sort of a symbolic return to order. And obviously they didn't do that. So they're all still social distancing for, whatever reason. Then we have the real image of the day that everybody's happy about is this sort of, transitional figure, this image here that we've got where it's not the old people. Right now it's Biden, we've got Kamala Harris, and we've got Nancy Pelosi. We got these two from California. We got Joe Biden over from Delaware. And, they're sort of up there. And Joe Biden made a pretty big, point about this. Says, hey, Madam Vice President, it's about time we said that, or it's about time we got a woman up there. And so they're really, making a big, I would say identity politics based distinction, really milking as much as they can out of that thing. And so let's get into the content. We're going to take a quick look at Jim Acosta, who yesterday gave us a little bit of hint about what Joe Biden was going to be speaking about. And in particular, he said that this line really stood out. A lot of people are seizing on this around the media, kind of on both sides, going, what? This is a head scratcher. But Joe Biden last night said something like, the January 6th insurrection is the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Which, what? They said that? So Jim Acosta posted this before the speech, and he actually is linking to the White House press release. And so they put this out also. And, they really want you to know this. This is why I wanted to point this out, is they are, Acosta got the talking point, then they released this as a formal memorandum. This is part of the document. It says here, 100 days since I took the oath of office. The worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. So they're specifically putting this paragraph front and center, right near the top. And this is what the full context of it looks like. So I want to go through this. I want to read it. Then we're going to listen to President Biden talking about it. He says, tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America. I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration, 100 days since I took the oath of office, lifted my hand off our family Bible, and inherited a nation. We all did. That was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. So keep that in mind, right? What happened on January 6th, which we covered, we were sort of live streaming that very day, and it was the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And so you're going to see a bunch of people out there saying, well, what he meant is the Capitol building was attacked. It hasn't been attacked since the Civil War. All of these other things are attacks on other buildings or other whatever. We're going to get into it. So here is Joe Biden last night.
I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration. 100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation. We all did. That was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again.
Yeah, Joe. Okay, great. So a lot of cheers, a lot of happiness, right? And so the worst attack since the Civil War. That happened a long time ago. That was, in the 1800s. For those of you who don't remember that, it was a long time ago. And I recall that I was alive when there was another attack, right? It's actually a couple of them. So the first one that came to my mind, and everybody in the media is running, everybody on conservative media is going down this laundry list, going through all of them. And I got to do it too, because it's so insane. I mean, what is he talking about? The worst attack on American democracy was January 6th. What is he talking about? Officer Sicknick died of natural causes. The other people who died, who were part of the MAGA mob, right, many of those people, it was like heart attacks and sudden death because of the stress of the events. A lot of officers were injured. Yes, we know, but the other person who was killed was shot by an officer working for the government, Ashley Babbitt, as she was walking in or sort of going into the court chamber, the Senate chamber. And so that was it, right? When we compare and contrast that to other attacks, if you want to say this was an attack on the federal government, there are other attacks that have been on the federal government, especially when I was alive. Here's one that I remember back in 1995. I was 10 years old. Remember this one, the Oklahoma City bombing. Okay, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was blown up. The target, according to Wikipedia, was the U.S. federal government. All right, they used a fertilizer truck bomb. And it was a truck bombing, mass murder. How many people died? 168. And 680 were injured. Perpetrators Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. There was anti-government sentiment and retaliation for the Ruby Ridge and Waco sieges. Okay, this was an attack on the federal building. This is an attack. Okay, what happened at the Capitol building did not look like that. It's a little bit of a different thing, but that was worse than that. According to Joe Biden, The next one that we have, of course, is Pearl Harbor. Okay, also a pretty big thing. And if you'll take a look over here, as I mentioned, the Civil War really took place in the 1800s. You'll notice that over here, this says this happened in 1995, which is significantly after the Civil War. This one also over here, Pearl Harbor, if you don't recall, this was 1941, which is also after the 1800s. 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. This happened after the Civil War. And in this attack on our American democracy, we have a lot of people were killed in this puppy. Take a look over here. We have 68 were killed, 35 wounded, 3 aircraft were shot down, 4 battleships sunk, 4 battleships damaged, 3 cruisers damaged, and those were just civilian casualties. Let's take a look over here. We have casualties and losses, 2,335 killed. Oh yeah, that's a pretty big number there. Significantly more than, I think, 5 who died as a result of the Capitol building, and this was another nation state actually attacking one of our ports where we have our military housed. And it looked pretty bad. This looked dramatically worse than what we saw on January 6th. Take a look over here. I mean, that is an entire stinking battleship that is going down right now. Very, very big explosions. I don't remember seeing that on January 6th. I think if I remember correctly, it was like some broken windows and some flagpoles and, you know, some pepper spray and things like that. But I don't remember entire battle carriers sinking to the bottom of the ocean or anything close to that. And so I was, of course, not alive for the Pearl Harbor attacks, but I was alive, just like I was when I was 10 for the Oklahoma City bombings. I was also around. I was in high school, in fact. I think I was a freshman when 9/11 happened. Okay, we have another almost 3,000 dead. 2,996 people died that day. 25,000 more were injured as terrorists took down the World Trade Center. And so, again, you know, another attack on American democracy. This one was really not from a nation state, but it was from sort of a pseudo-nation state that is in the form of al-Qaeda and terrorism and whatever. I can get into all that in a separate show. But the point is, here are 3 that I just came up with off the top of my head. Wikipedia has some pretty good information about them. Somebody should send that stuff to the White House because I feel like there's a mismatch on reality here. They're saying that this was the worst attack on America since the Civil War. I just pointed to 3 others. So my real question is, if that is their barometer, if that's how they view the world, we got a problem, right? Because one of these is less significant than the others. And apparently they have that relationship or that idea inverted. Not too good. Then we have Joe Biden continuing on. And so we're going to get into the criminal justice stuff. There's not much of it, about 3 minutes. And I'm going to read it. Then we're going to listen to his clips. So here is Joe Biden today. It says, "We won't ignore what our intelligence agents have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to our homeland today: white supremacy." Okay, so that is the big hit right here. White supremacy. He says it's terrorism. White supremacy is terrorism. We are not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke to Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I can look her in the eye. She looked at me. She said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was. If we have the courage to act as a Congress, we have all seen the knee of injustice on the back of Black Americans. Now is our opportunity to make some real progress. So you're going to note this, right? Our intelligence agencies have determined the most lethal terrorist threat to our homeland today is white supremacy is terrorism, is what he said. All right, so here is Joe Biden last night.
Don't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism.
Oh.
We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress.
Okay, so this is what I've been waiting for. I've been waiting for this for a very long period of time. What are you going to do there, Joe? Because you were in the White House for 8 years when you were vice president, didn't do anything. Then prior to that, you've been in the Senate for like 45 years, and you have done nothing on this other than the opposite of justice reform. You have been the person who has been promulgating more and more of a strict, strenuous criminal justice state. This overly aggressive bureaucratic mess that we live in today. You did that. You did all of it from 1984, 1986, 1988, 1994, all of the different crime bills. And you quoted yourself. You said any criminal justice bill that came out of Delaware or came out of Congress, I think was your quote, since 1976 had your name on it. So you have been in government for a very long time. What are you going to do about it? What's going to be the change here? How are you going to solve this issue? Well, he just identifies it as white supremacy. So we're going to deal with white supremacy. He does tell us in the next clip that he does have a solution. We're going to learn about that in a minute. But I want to take a quick minute on this white supremacy thing, because is that the root problem here? Are these cops killing individuals because of white supremacy? And if so, can you just come out and say that? I mean, let's get down to brass tacks here. If you think that Derek Chauvin is a white supremacist, even though Keith Ellison and many other people said that race didn't factor into it, the people who were prosecuting him have questioned that sentiment. Well, then what is the bigger problem here? And we need to really identify it in order to solve it. So I get really tired of these racial things being thrown around without any other evidence or without anything to back it up. So he says white supremacists are the biggest national security threat, according to our own intelligence agencies. But folks, other than January 6th, what have you seen out there from white supremacists? Okay, the only people that I see on a regular basis out there torching America, lighting up stores, and causing damage and wreaking havoc across this country have been two groups, and neither one of them have been white supremacists to my knowledge. Now, I know that there have been, sort of scattering of stories where they will show up sort of counter-protesting, but by and large, what's been happening out of Portland, out of Seattle, out of Minneapolis, it has been Antifa and BLM. It hasn't been the Proud Boys to my knowledge. It hasn't been the KKK running around in robes and hoods. It's been the Antifa people with their little, barrel shields and their red helmets and their, black outfits. That's what we're seeing on a regular basis. So they keep, telling me that there's white supremacists running around and that we're all on the verge of them seizing control of the country. But I don't see that. And you know why I know it's not out there? Because if it was happening, it would be on the front page of every stinking newspaper every single day. It would be on the Washington Post, New York Times, everywhere. It's not. And what we do see is from people on the ground doing the reporting, like Andy No, who says, they're burning another building down and another one, night after night after night. And then you have people like the Portland mayor coming out now and saying, well, I'm flipping the whole script, right? A year ago, very pro Antifa, very pro letting this protest continue because he wanted people's voices to be heard. And now everybody's going, no, not so fast, right? This isn't about justice. This is about sort of wrecking America and undermining capitalism because they've identified it as fascism for whatever reason. And so that is really, in my opinion, where the issue lies, where this whole thing boils down to. But he wants to come out now and say it's all about white supremacy when the root of the problem is from other groups that I can't identify as white supremacists. And we are also seeing this trickle down into other facets of society. We talked about this in North Carolina when we were covering the Anthony Brown Jr. case. We talked about this week. Okay, the judge is not letting that video out. You can have an agreement or disagreement with that. Video's not coming out for the time being. And there are already protests that are bubbling up around North Carolina. They shut down schools. They said, no, we're going back to remote learning because we're so petrified that the protests are going to get out of control, that our children will not be safe. So we have to go back to remote learning. Is that white supremacists who are riding around waving burning crosses and donning hoods? No, it's not. It's a different demographic. So why didn't he mention them? Because they're as big a threat to our justice system as anything is. He didn't mention them. He mentioned white supremacists. It's because he wants to realign the whole thing in that direction. And folks, I am not trying to cover for white supremacists at all. I've told you many times on this channel how reprehensible I think the whole conversation about that is. Anybody who even tries to sort of jockey people based on racial or gender or any sort of orientation is reprehensible to me. I don't care what you do with your life, what you look like, or where you came from. If you're a good person and you provide value in this world and you do something meaningful with your life, I love the hell out of you. And so I'm not trying to cover for those people, but I am somebody who is passionate as hell about reforming our justice system. I got a whole company I've been working on my entire professional career to see some movement on this thing. So we got to call out the problem for what it is. And I've been practicing criminal law. I've been practicing justice for 7 years now, 10 years. Since 2013. Okay, I've been licensed, and I was an intern before that. I can't do the math on the fly when I'm heated. But my point is, I have not seen white supremacy as a problem in our justice system. Is there racism? Sure, of course there is. Are there other problems that I think have bigger return on investment if we solve them? Abso-stinkin-lutely. And so when I have this guy, the father of the crime bill, in my opinion, the guy who's responsible for more black people in federal prisons than any person living or dead, is Joe Biden. Kamala Harris is a close second. Now, these two are out there preaching to the rest of us that this is all about white supremacy. Well, folks, hey, Joe, you wrote the laws. Are they white supremacist laws? Because you wrote them. Now you're going to preach at the rest of us, scolding us because police departments and citizens in states and society around our country are enacting the laws that you drafted. You're going to turn around and call them white supremacists now, 30 years later, after people are sick and tired of the policies you've been cramming down everybody's throats, and then lecture us? Give me a break. Now he goes on, he says, the vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform, speaking about cops, and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systematic racism in our criminal justice system, right? And enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. Okay, so this is the solution. This is his proposal on this. Pass the George Floyd Act, right? And we're going to take a quick look at that here today. So he's saying it's the problem. He's identifying the problem as systematic racism, which is different than systemic, I think. So systematic, he probably just kind of butchered that word. I think he means systemic racism, or maybe he means systematic. I don't know. George Floyd's name, so he wants that bill to pass. He says, I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus, but let's get it done next month. All right. So he's giving us a target. So in May, we want action. All right. So in May, the president wants action on the George Floyd bill passed. Already passed the House. Okay, now we got to go over to the Senate. They got to peel off a handful of Republicans, and it should pass because they control that chamber. Plus, they have Kamala Harris. We'll see. He says the country supports this reform and Congress should act. We have the giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice. Real justice. And with the plans outlined tonight, we have a real chance to root out systematic racism that plagues America and American lives in other ways. A chance to deliver real equity. Well, so maybe he means systematic, which is a little bit of a different word change, I think. So he's talking about, real equity now, right? So now we're talking about sort of equal opportunity versus equal outcome. And I think everybody in America is okay with equal opportunity. Give everybody a same starting position, but equal outcome, that's a whole different political philosophy. It's a whole different theory of governing, and not a good one. Has a pretty bad track record throughout this country. Just go ask Mao. Here is Joe Biden on crime reform.
The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want...
You think so, Maxine? Really? Really? Oh, come on. You hate the cops.
I know they want to help
dump
meet
water
this
all over
moment as
myself.
well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act. We have a giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice, real justice. And with the plan.
Oh, okay. You see Maxine Waters up there just standing, clapping away. Yeah, we love the police. Come on, give me a break. I just was trying to take a sip of water, and I just dumped it all over myself, laughing my butt off at her standing up. All right, so what does he want to do? The George Floyd bill. He wants that passed in May. What is in it? Let's take a quick look. Here it is over from the congress.gov website. So it was sponsored by Rep. Bass, Karen Bass, out of California, and it's the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act of 2020. You'll notice down here the tracker says that it has passed the House of Representatives. So on, looks like July 20th, it was read the second time. It is now placed on the Senate legislative calendar. So it's over there with the Senate. Now, here is what it is introduced as. Called the Justice and Policing Act. The bill addresses a wide range of policies and issues regarding policing practices and law enforcement accountability. Okay, that sounds good. It includes measures to increase accountability for law enforcement misconduct. All right, like that. To enhance transparency, yes, and data collection, and to eliminate discriminatory policing practices. All right, well, we'll see what that says. The bill facilitates federal enforcement of constitutional violations. For example, the excessive use of force by state and local law enforcement. So it facilitates federal enforcement of constitutional violations by state and local law enforcement. What does that sound like? Facilitates federal enforcement? Huh. So it sounds like we're going to have a sort of a federal agency managing all the local agencies. Federal agency monitoring state and local law enforcement. Okay, well, I guess that's one way to federalize the police force. Then we also have it lowers the criminal intent standard from willful to knowing or reckless to convict a law enforcement officer for misconduct in federal prosecution. Oh, so it's like changing the entire standard of the law. So if you are a regular person and you do something that is a crime, then you're held, let's say, to the willful standard, right? You have to, that conduct has to be willful. I intended to do the thing that I did. It was a willful act. So they're saying that's a pretty high standard. They want to drop that down. Sort of, it wasn't a willful act, but it was kind of a reckless act. So it's easier now to prove that, right? So you can say, well, I didn't intend to do that. It wasn't a willful act. That's a higher standard. There's a mental state there that requires a little bit more culpability in order to prove that element. Then we drop it down to a reckless, less. Okay, it doesn't have to be intentional. It doesn't have to be willful. Now it's just, well, it's just kind of a reckless thing to do. Easier to convict somebody in that manner. And so they're going to drop that standard down just for the cops, not for anybody else. Kind of the same thing they want to do for hate crime legislation, right? They want to take something that's already criminal and then sort of change it a little bit. So amplify the penalties by making it even more serious based on an aggravating factor that's already an underlying element of the offense typically. So what they'll do is sort of, aggravate it. Here, what they want to do is aggravate this by lowering the standard that protects police officers. So if you're a police officer, you're not going to like this, obviously. Limits qualified immunity as a defense to liability in a private civil action against law enforcement officer or state. So I've had a lot of qualms about qualified immunity. I think that's probably a good thing. Authorizes the DOJ to issue subpoenas in investigations of police departments for a pattern or practice of discrimination. So again, the Department of Justice now is going to take over subpoenas and investigations of police departments. So it is the federalization of a lot of judiciaries, of a lot of courts, right? Because the courts in local levels will grant the subpoenas and authorize a lot of the investigations to move forward. The Department of Justice wants to take it. So the federal government wants to come in and just subsume a bunch of the roles and responsibilities of local states and governments. That's going to be the George Floyd Act. So why would that not, right? Why? Of course, everything else is supposed to be going towards the government anyways. Government's getting bigger, accepting more responsibilities, want more and more control of your life, don't even want you to leave the stinking house if they can help it. And so they are now going to be trying to subsume local law enforcement up to the federal level. Take a lot of those lower level responsibilities and say, oh, you guys are incompetent. You can't handle that. We're going to take those up because we're more competent, because we know how competent the federal government is. They do everything very well for us Here is the rest of this. The bill also creates a national registry, the National Police Misconduct Registry, to compile data on complaints and records of police misconduct, which is not a bad idea, right? This is something that I have sort of spoken about, and I don't know how this would work in practice. I would definitely like to learn more about this. Don't like the idea of a national registry, but I also don't like the idea of police officers being able to get in trouble in one state and go across state lines. We have this already in the United States. If you get a traffic ticket in one state and you say, well, I've lost my license in Arizona because I've been driving like a speed demon, and I have too many points on my license. License is lost and revoked. Well, what happens if you just pick up and let's say you move over to Colorado? I'm going to go to a different state so I can get my car back. Go just north, and it is now a clean slate. Can you start over? No, because we're part of an interstate compact. I don't know if Colorado is or what they would do with that. I don't practice law there, but they would typically, because all of the states are part of this interstate compact, they all communicate with each other. So even though they have a different DMV or MVD or whatever, our system will still say, hey, Arizona revoked this person's license. Just want to let you know, other 49 states. So if you want to take action, you can. Colorado would then theoretically take action, and that person would also not be able to drive there. So same type of concept for police, right? Why does one officer in Arizona get in trouble and then get disciplined, sanctioned, whatever, pick up, be able to go across state lines and then get a job somewhere else, or just kind of, poke around for a little bit? No, I haven't been disciplined in the last year or whatever, and then get a job doing security or something along those lines. So I would be open to an idea like that. I don't know practically how that would work because national registries, I'm not a fan of that concept in general. It establishes a framework to prohibit racial profiling. So again, I don't know what that means or what that entails, but it also establishes new requirements for law enforcement officers and agencies, including report data of use of force incidents, training on implicit bias, and racial profiling. So if that's anything like CRT that they're doing elsewhere, that is a problem. Also to wear body cameras. All right, so that's probably at least one good thing in this, which is wearing body cameras. The rest of it, I don't know yet. Now, so that is what the president is wanting to proffer forward for the rest of us. We got 3 minutes of justice reform, even though I would say it's one of the top issues in this country, is it not? I mean, it's captivated the entire nation's attention, the Chauvin trial. And we've got several more that are coming down the pike. We've got several more that we don't even know if the officers are going to get charged yet or not. So my point is, we're going to be reliving this thing over and over and over again. So you would think that they would maybe expedite this, and maybe they will. Maybe they'll get something passed that will satiate people throughout the country. I'm guessing not. All right, so did anybody watch this thing last night? Not really. About half the people did that watched Donald Trump in 2017. Deadline is posting here from Dominic Patton. Ted Johnson posted this about 1 o'clock today. Says Joe Biden's address to Congress snares 22.6 million viewers in near final numbers, way down from Trump. His first address to a joint session of Congress drew 22.6 million viewers across 7 major networks, 47% drop from 43 million or so who tuned in to Donald Trump's first speech. That was back in 2017. So almost half. He had 4 million on ABC 4 million, MSNBC 3.9, NBC 3.5, CBS 3.3. The list goes on and on. All right, so not many people watching it. What can you take from that, right? Is it COVID? Or people just checked out of politics? Is Joe Biden really the most boring president in American history? Probably has something to do with it. Other people are saying, oh, well, this is just a return to normal. These are just normal numbers. We had Obama, who was an oratician. This is somebody who could speak out there and captivate an audience. Then we had Donald Trump. People are saying, well, he was just a train wreck. So everybody wanted to watch a train wreck. Now this is just a return to form. This is just a return to normal. And nobody's interested in this because America's back, as they say. So, split it however you want. I think that nobody wants to listen to Joe Biden because he is speaking so slowly. It's very difficult to even pay attention, honestly. I mean, you listen to those clips. It takes him 7 minutes to say something you can say in 30 seconds. That's really difficult to listen to. All right, so here is, what else do we have? Other reactions. New York Post, not happy about it. Their editorial board says here that the speech bombs on all counts. failed on all counts, didn't sell his latest spending plan, didn't sell his larger agenda, and worst of all, it didn't sell him. Started with an utterly bizarre mask theater. All the politicians in the room have been fully vaccinated. Biden's own CDC says that's enough. So why the universal masking and social distancing? The message cutting across the president's occasional optimism was that this nightmare will never end. Simply isn't true, which is the point I made earlier. Equally obviously false was Biden's now routine effort to claim all the credit for the vaccinations. All that was set in motion before he took office. Then he moved into a series of disjointed claims about the American Families Plan that barely tracked, even though he was reading a prepared text. It seems like he was just skipping whole paragraphs and even pages. You could see even Democrats wincing above their masks. Oh, and a classic Biden non sequitur attacking those who oppose his plans to hike taxes on the rich says, ask them, whose taxes are you going to raise? No one's is the answer, because the opposition isn't looking to spend trillions more than the feds already do. Yet he never gave any clear unifying theme for the Families Plan because it doesn't have one. It's just another grab bag of items off the Democrats' wish list. Wandered into something like a State of the Union speech, ticking off the most vacuous sales pitches for a host of bills he'd like Congress to pass, which they won't. Mixed in were lies about how he'd solve the border crisis as vice president, plus vague waves at foreign policy and trade. He talks buy American as much as the guy he replaced, and some noise about the being tough militarily when the DOD is the only agency he doesn't want to spend more money on. Yeah, hoary cliches, empty rhetoric about unity, spiced with blather about white supremacy and systemic racism, even as he was insisting that nearly all cops only work hard to protect the public. After all that, his effort to close with the traditional message of hope fell pretty flat. He was out to show confidence in America after failing to give America reason to have much confidence in him, right? So now that's, obviously, folks, I'm not even trying to be neutral on this one, right? I get so irritated when I hear these people talk about justice reform. It's almost personal to me because I see what they have done to people, and I see that they are in power now, and it's getting 3 minutes on a speech, even though the whole country is just up in arms over all this stuff. And, to be honest, if you're a Democrat too, aren't you a little bit tired of this? Aren't you tired of all these politicians just paying lip service to these issues? Right? He said nothing about justice reform other than we want to go past the George Floyd bill. Use the name, check the box, move on to the next thing, because he doesn't care about it. But they will grift off of the entire Democratic Party for the foreseeable future. They're going to raise a lot of money. They're going to use this as a bludgeon against the Republicans. You know who suffers? People in the justice system. Really, that's who it is. It's people who are going through the system, people like you and me, good people who just are looking for a little bit of help. One thing that I would love to see from Joe Biden is some actual criminal justice reform. He's sort of done the mea culpa thing on the last 30 years of wreckage on our system. And so if he did just a little bit to sort of unring that bell, I would be happy with him. I would say, good job, man. I'll praise you on it, but it's not going to happen because he has a record. You have to look at the record. He may say and talk a lot about justice reform and that he's down for the movement or whatever's happening right now, but he is not. He's got 30 years of consistent pro-enforcement, anti-rights legislation that is now in effect in our country and has been that way for a long time. All right, I got to move on. I'm going to just keep going off on this. Kevin McCarthy says this whole thing could have just been an email, which is hilarious, right? Because it is accurate. You could have just, hey, just send us all the bills you want. Okay, we're not going to do any of that. Thanks. Go back to bed. Now we have CBS. CBS News says that tremendous speech. Really, really good. Actually, in fact, 85% of the people who watched the speech loved it. So 85%, if you take a look at their numbers over here, you'll see here, this is from their CBS News poll. There's a YouGov poll. Looks like 85% of the people who watched the speech approve. Only 15% disapprove, which is kind of crazy. I mean, wow, it must have been a home run. Let's look at who they polled, though. Where did these numbers come from? Oh, of the 943 people that they asked, 54% of them were Democrats. Okay, so over half, 510 people. Then we have 25% of people who are independents, and then 18% who are Republicans. Okay, so that makes sense. So the Republicans, about 18% of them, they liked it. Maybe every one of them did. But the independents and the Democrats, 3% of the Republicans, all approve of this speech. So it's just a total stinking scam, folks. Stunning CBS poll claims that stunningly duplicitous story aimed at shoring up the response to Biden's speech. They wrote on their website, most viewers who turned in to watch the president liked what they heard and came away feeling optimistic about America. What they didn't tell their viewers nor readers is that the poll was wildly biased towards self-identifying Democrats and traditionally left-leaning independents. So it's just, it's on brand. The whole thing's, it's AstroTurf. All right. And so here is what CNN said. So CNN, they said that the speech was actually worse than Donald Trump. So according to them, only 51% of the largely Democrat speech watchers approved of Biden's comments, but the corporate media outlets still labeled the ratings as very positive. The reaction is more than a 20% drop from when Obama addressed the body and got a 68% approval, or when Bush did and got a 66% approval. So so here is CNN trying to do their little spin game. Here you can see this. This is from Manu Raju, who is actually over at CNN. The speech watchers tonight overall leaned Democratic. So Biden's at 51%, Trump at 57%, Obama at 68%, Bush at 66%. But over here they say very positive reaction. Well, not really. Kind of lukewarm is what I would say. Obama, yeah, that sounds very positive. Lukewarm, I think, is the more appropriate solution there. All right. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't make it to the event. So because she was forced to stay home, 200 people were handpicked by the administration to attend. Normally 1,000 people will go. Many legislators are vaccinated against the virus, but they still limited capacity. AOC, not invited. Ah, dang it. Sorry, AOC. All right. We got some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Let's take a quick look at them. We've got Chris_John in the house says, one really good question about last night's gathering is why, if they trust the vaccine, they're all vaccinated, are they still masking up and social distancing? Actions are always more honest. They don't seem to trust the vaccine. Yeah, that's a reasonable takeaway, right? Either the vaccine works and it stops you from getting sick, or it doesn't, right? Theoretically, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but these are our elected officials. I thought that they've been telling us to get vaccinated so that we can get kind of back to normal, but maybe not. We have Leafy Bug in the house. Says, if you believe the Dem MSM narrative that the Capitol riot was a genuine attempt to halt the congressional process of appointing a president, if you believe it was a genuine insurrection, if you believe all the spin and the lies, then you'd agree with Biden's claim. Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's... I don't think so. I mean, honestly, like, even if you did, comparing that to the Oklahoma City bombing or to Pearl Harbor, those seem worse. We have Ma Fox says, Rob, El Paso, Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, Unite the Right vehicle attack, Portland train attack, Lafayette shooting. So are those all? So I haven't seen much of those, Ma. I mean, I know there's a lot of shootings. There's like every time that there's a 3 to 4 person, shooting taking place in this country, that's all happening. Pittsburgh synagogue? When was that? Am I just totally off on this? I could be. But what I see in the news on a regular basis, it's consistently more Antifa and BLM torching buildings every day, every night. Are these people setting up their own governments? Do we have Chaz and Chap for Proud Boys? Are they setting up their own little cities within cities and being allowed to fester there? I understand that there are bad groups in this country that do bad things. No question about that. But there is one group that is allowed to sort of operate in the shadows without any real repercussion. And Donald Trump didn't do much here either, right? A lot of people were saying you got to go crack the whip on him. I'm not sure that would have been the right strategy. There are, of course, bad people on both sides. I'm not endorsing the Proud Boys or any of those things. All right? I vehemently disagree with them, and I condemn the hell out of all of them, honestly, because I don't know much about them. And if they are out there screaming, or doing things that are racist and vitriolic towards other, demographics, I got a problem with that. But if they're not doing those things and they're being labeled in that manner, that's a problem. And if we're sort of blaming the downfall of our justice system on white supremacy, when I don't see any of that in our justice system, that's a problem, Man. I'm trying to just identify the right solution. It feels like there's way different standards for two different demographics. One group is aggressively demonized. The other group is forgotten about and thrown by the wayside. And that is not justice in this country. That's my only point, right? All right. So thank you, Mom. We have Feisty Lady says, if Biden leaves office, regardless of what removes him, and Harris becomes POTUS, how is the vice president spot filled? I think the vice president, who becomes a president nominates that person. Then the Senate confirms that person. So it's sort of like the same thing, right? The president then gets to nominate the vice president. Senate confirms them. We have It's Ed said, I love the passion about justice reform. I agree we need to make changes. Not sure what those changes are, but the First Step Act is a step in the right direction, right? The first step, I think, is accountability and transparency, right? We need more of that. And so any act that supports that, I'm in favor of. We have No Doubt says, the only white supremacist I've been in movies. Sounds like Joe has been watching too much Hollywood. Yeah, it could be true. Huggin Munnin says, wouldn't a good start to solving a lot of those problems with the legal system be setting standards for sentencing? No more than 5 to 10, just you did this, get this amount of time. Man, woman, black, white, you don't matter what you did to get this. So Huggin Munnin, we already have that. It's called mandatory sentencing. And there are a lot of problems with that, right? And this was sort of in response to some of the racial disparities, because what was happening previously is there would be let's say a white judge who sentences a white man to 1 year in prison and a black man to 5 years in prison for the same offense. And so they would say, well, why is that? And the judge would make up a bunch of stuff. So they said, well, no, we have to cap this. We have to put a low end cap and a high end cap and make sure that judges are not exceeding that. It's mandatory. So they set the ranges. Now, the problem with that is then they have mandatory sentencing. So now you can get a drug addict, somebody who's, let's say, has a conviction in January, March, April. They get in trouble. All of those cases are prosecuted. They can file those charges 5 years later. They do so. That person has since gotten sober, gotten a job, got married, had kids, started a family, whatever. They bring those charges 7 years later, and now that person has mandatory sentencing. It's a 3-strike rule state, so we've got 3 strikes. That person's out. They go to prison. Big problem. That's mandatory sentencing, right? That doesn't work out well for them. So that's why I have a problem with that. We have It's Ed says, every time Biden talks about justice, I shudder. His justice sends a lot of people behind bars. We had a president that signed the First Step Act and got rid of him for a president that incarcerated more people than anyone else. And his VP incarcerated the second most people. It's insane. And they still claim the mantle of justice reform. And they're still blaming our problems in our society as it relates to our justice system on white supremacy, which is my whole point here. We have Quayne in the House says, hey, Rob, it does seem like the Democrats project an issue onto their adversaries that they are actively committing. A confession through projection, if you will. The hypocrisy is ad nauseum for me. Yeah, and I totally agree with that, right? They do a very good job of this. They're doing exactly what they're claiming the other party to be. And it's so frustrating for somebody in my position because I see the consequences of this. And I'm so sick and tired of hearing these politicians not accept responsibility for it and shirk off responsibility to other people. Joe Biden passed the bills. Now he's out here saying that it's about white supremacy. No, Joe, it's about the bills that you passed. It's about the powers that you gave law enforcement. It's about the infrastructure that you've created over the last 30 years. Now, you can blame white supremacists all you want. It's not going to solve anything. And it really irritates me because there are people in our society who are hurting as a result of his actions. Nadarbs Lassier says, January 6th wasn't even the worst attack on the Capitol building since then. One of these bombers got pardoned by Bill Clinton, works with BLM. So I'm assuming she hasn't changed much. Terrorists bombed the Capitol building in the early 80s. November 7th, 1983, female-led group called the Communist Organization, or M19, bombed the Capitol building. Reagan's imperialistic vision of the country. Got it. We have C. The Veil says, recklessness. An officer takes a person to the ground to subdue the person to arrest, and that gets called recklessness. Handcuffs cause skin rash equals recklessness. Pursuit suspect gets into a car chase. Recklessness. Arresting the perp and the innocent goes free. Recklessness. Yeah, that's exactly right. They want to lower the standard so that they can prosecute police with very little hurdles. Cax Axe says, let us celebrate. The mob out for blood against those who dissent. A man dead from drugs. A jury too afraid. Another imprisoned. We must celebrate. Justice has been served. They told us the news. They tell us what we know. Who has time to verify? Let us rejoice, for our will has been served. It's poetry from Cax Axe. Thank you for sharing that with us, Cax Axe. We have No Doubt says, will they now go after sherries that refuse to enforce unconstitutional laws using that bill? Will they now go after sherries that refuse to enforce unconstitutional law using that? I don't know what a sherry is. What is a sherry? Sherries? I'm blanking on that. I don't know what a Sherry. I don't know what it is. Patriot Musk says, Rob, I'm worried that they are going to use the white supremacy narrative and Floyd incident in some way with primary school curriculums to indoctrinate children to hate white people. I think they're already doing that. I think that is called critical race theory. I think that's already a thing. So it's already happening across this country. Isn't that nice? We have Liberty or Death says, isn't it great though that we have cured all diseases except for the Kung flu and cancer as we know it? Oh my gosh, what a day. We got Nadarb says, what political thought about the big speech? Biden just gave the most ideologically ambitious speech of any Democratic president in generations. It's too funny. There was one I was reading on the New York Times by Robin today. I didn't clip it because it was so funny. I was going to be giggling my way through the entire story. I couldn't even believe what I was reading. It was like somebody was talking about a messianic figure in Joe Biden. You know, he walked through the doors, the same doors that insurrectionists tried to breach down on their mission to eviscerate America. Joe Biden, America's renewed inspiration, walked through those double doors and entered into the forum with new hope and new vision for America. And you're going, who is this person? What is she talking about? Did you watch him? He kind of just, hobbled on in there like any other person does. But it's this glorification, this deification of Joe and of all of these political figures. We saw it with Obama. Trumpers did it with Trump, right? A lot of people, oh my God, it's Trump. And anything he does is without reproach. And you're going, my gosh, it's frustrating. I don't even know how do you even address those people? Because you're not on the same playing field. They're playing a game of puffing up and being so sycophantic that you can't even have a real conversation about them. They're too enamored. It's not a logical conversation. It's an emotional one. And we know how those go. We have Joe Snow in the house says, Rob, not sure if you watched it, but Donald Trump's Jr.'s speech, or Donald J. Trump's speech, can't remember 17 or 18, was one of my favorite political speeches maybe ever. There was the one where he gave Rush Limbaugh that Presidential Medal of Freedom, was very impactful on me also, not just because of that one, but that was a very powerful, that might've been his 2017 one. He had people standing up, veterans, officers, all sorts of great American heroes. And it was pretty profound. I'm obviously a big Rush Limbaugh fan. I know a lot of people don't like the man, but he was a hero to me in many ways. Big inspiration for why I do this show, really. I mean, I was listening to him growing up with my mom in my mom's car. And so that was very impactful. I totally agree with you. Okay, so all right, we got one more question from Miss Faith. Let's see what else. We've got Woodworking Medic says, couldn't agree with you more. I work every day with people who were first responders during the Oklahoma City bombing. They felt like former President Biden's words were ridiculous. Yeah, they were ridiculous. They were ridiculous because it's supposed to further a narrative. It's this white supremacy narrative that they are trying to cram down everybody's throat. They're saying it's the biggest problem in the country. I don't see it. Ma sees it. Some other people see it. I don't see it. And so I want to know what they want to do about that. What is their solution? What other liberties, what other new bureaucracies, what other things do they want to do in this country in order to solve that problem? I'm open ears for it. Passing the George Floyd bill, I don't know how that addresses that at all. So is it everything else? I mean, like literally everything else he went through. He talked about food, water, healthcare, border, immigrant, everything else in the term of equity. We're going to have to remake society in order to root out this white supremacy. The entire structure, economics, education, culture, law, everything's got to be reformed in order to root out the systemic cause, which as they are now defining it to be, which is systemic racism. All right, we'll see where it goes. Let's change gears, shall we? Try to recenter myself. Just do a little Zen meditation. Oh my gosh, I should do some 4-7-8 breathing, but that takes too long.